Okay, welcome back. This is part 2 of the series. If you haven't watched part 1, you might want to go back and check that out. Really talking about my journey from being a hardcore scientist, atheist, to now talking about things like psychic and other aspects of how we can tune into the broader world and gain perspective on some of the crazy stuff happening right now. And so I want to start this story back in time. One of the first major question marks that I had that shook my sort of existing way of seeing the world, my existing box of logic at the time. So I grew up in Utah, and it was somewhere where there was a predominant religion there, and I didn't grow up in that religion. I grew up in a basically atheist household. My father had left that church at an early age, and so I grew up atheist, maybe agnostic towards atheist, not really believing, not going to church, none of that stuff. And so I didn't know what to think about the broader universe or things. I just didn't really think about it when I was younger. So when I was about 14 years old, this was in the early 80s, I had this experience that just, it rattled me. I couldn't explain it. And it really started a journey of truly questioning everything. I mean, I think I was always curious. I was always asking questions. But this made those questions deeper. And again, before I go into it, I want to emphasize this idea of curiosity and how key that is to everybody's, to yours, to our evolution. Is true open-minded curiosity about what is this world around us? What is there? And not just buying any box of logic, whether it's a religious box of logic or a scientific box of logic where they think they have answers. Both think they have all the answers, right? Again, I've said they're often similar in how they operate. They're very different in belief systems in many ways. And yet they operate so similarly in so many ways. So here I was, headed on a family trip in the remote wilderness of Canada. We were on these little rafts going into a sound on the western shore of Canada for like a week-long trip. And there were little motorized rafts. It was like the weirdest thing ever. But, so we just get on a raft each day with all our gear, our camping gear and everything, and like motor down this sound. It sort of looked in some ways like this out here. Motor down the sound and go find a camping spot and then camp at that spot and then pack up the next day and go to the next spot. And it was, remote wilderness, no houses. An occasional power boat would go by or something, but it was like very remote, very wilderness, grizzly bears around, that kind of scene. Even if cell phones had existed at the time, they certainly wouldn't have worked out there. So we had no connection, no communication with what was going on back home. I had a dog back home. He wasn't on the trip. Big dog. He was way too big to go on these little rafts with us. He was like 140 pounds of Alaskan. It was like Alaskan Malamute, and what else was he? He was like German Shepherd. He was a mix, a mutt. But I was so close to him because I was kind of geeky in high school, or this was junior high. I was geekier in junior high. I didn't have a lot of friends, so my best friend was my dog, Bear. Okay, so here I was, Alaskan wilderness, or Canadian wilderness, it is, and we're camped out. I have my tent. It's set up sort of up on the hillside, a little ways up from the beach where the rafts are parked. And I'm by myself because, it's just my family and a few other family friends. So I start falling asleep in my tent. And, it's still light out. I mean, even though it was like past 10 p.m., it was still light out because it's pretty far north. And this was like in June of that year. So I start falling asleep and I have this dream. And it was like, it felt felt real. It felt present in a way that other dreams did not. I had this dream and I'm talking to my dog Bear. I'm having a conversation. I had never had a dream like this before, talking to any animal or any person in my dream in that way. But I'm talking to my dog Bear and we're having a nice conversation, and then Bear says, it's been great, but I have to go now. I have to leave. And I'm like, what do you mean? I have to go. I have to leave. Now is the time for me to leave. I have to say goodbye. And then he goes out through this door, and I remember, I have the impression of like a red color. I mean, it's a little bit more red. This is more pink here, but it's like a very red color. He goes out through the door shuts, and Bear is gone. Bear is just gone. Like gone. Like I can feel it viscerally. Like Bear is gone. I will not see Bear again. I will not talk to Bear again. Bear is gone. Okay. So I'm like, I wake up from that and I'm literally crying. I mean, it was so powerful. I'd never had a dream before or since where I like literally wake up in tears. But that time I woke up in tears, crying. And so then I'm like, okay, I'm by myself here, but I'm like a 14-year-old and, I'm kind of embarrassed. So I didn't go tell anybody or talk to anybody about it or anything. I just like kept it to myself. This feeling of like both sadness and embarrassment. And then ultimately I concluded, that's crazy, okay, whatever. It was a weird dream. That's crazy. I was very sad, but whatever. It's just one of those weird things, a weird dream. Okay, so I dismissed it. And it was a few days later before we got back in to shore, came back across the border, and actually we hadn't come across the border yet. We were in Vancouver at a hotel. Yes, I can sort of remember where borders are and that Vancouver is in Canada. I think the Canadians would be upset if I told you that it was in the United States, and I would understand why. So we were in a hotel in Vancouver, just recovering, taking showers. After you've been out camping for a while, you like to take a shower, clean off a little bit. We were there. I went into the shower, and while I was in the shower, my father used the old-fashioned dial phone to call up back home and see how things are going with the dog sitters. I come out and from the shower, and my father is done with the call, and he says, I have some bad news. Our dog Bear was, there was another dog running by out in front on a somewhat busy road, and Bear ran out. It was a female dog, and Bear ran out to chase this other dog and got hit by a car and killed. What? Okay, here come the tears again, and very embarrassed. So I was shocked. I didn't even at that moment connect it to the dream yet. It wasn't at that moment. But as soon as I could extract myself from the social situation and the embarrassment of crying there, I went into my room and, let loose. All the tears came out. And then the dream came back to me oh, weird. I had this dream. I dreamed Bear going away. I come back to civilization and Bear went away. Much later, I tried to calculate the odds of this because I remember in high school, I read some editorial by somebody, some random person who was railing against anything coincidental or abnormal or whatever like this. He was talking about, when you're thinking about somebody and then they call 2 minutes later. He was making the argument that that's all just random chance, that it's just coincidental. We think about lots of people lots of times, enough times that if you make a list of all the people you think about and then you make a list of all the people who could call you and when, that just statistics probability would say that they're likely to line up once in a while. So after reading that, I was like, what is the probability that I would have a once in a lifetime intensive dream? Literally, I have not had an intense dream like that since. A once in a lifetime dream about an event of my dog dying where my dog actually dies. And I have that while I'm out in the remote wilderness where there's no way I could have learned about it in any other way but something like psychic or whatever, something, something unexplainable by current science. Okay, I want to make a quick point here. I'm saying by current science. Now, many people think that all this psychic stuff and stuff, that it's been invalidated somehow or whatever. It hasn't. It hasn't. I mean, there are many skeptics who just dismiss it. They have their box of logic that it's not possible. So in reality, science has not very much explored this stuff. There are a few people on the fringes, and I'll talk about them other times, that have actually studied some of this stuff and found some very interesting data that supports that something is going on. But nonetheless, like this really got to me once I realized what had happened. And then I tried to calculate what are the odds. And to the best of my ability, I calculated that with the very best assumptions, something like this would happen about 1 in 8 lifetimes. With the very best, most optimistic assumptions on the side of statistics, 1 in 8 lifetimes. Okay, maybe I'm just that 1 in 8 lucky person. The skeptics can easily dismiss things away with their box of logic that says, it's just coincidence, it's just random. I'll do a whole other video on randomness, because randomness is another religion that many people adhere to. They adhere to the church, the temple of randomness is how I've written it out for a book I've been slowly working on. The temple of randomness. They believe in randomness actually as a thing, when it's not really a thing. The randomness is the absence of knowledge about what's going on under the hood. You call it, if you don't understand what's going on under the hood, you call it random. And you're done with it. Yay! Another win for the temple of randomness. Okay, well, I don't believe with this incident that it was randomness. I mean, I question. There's that open-mindedness, and I encourage everybody to take open-minded curiosity. So I did question. I calculated the odds. I really tried to figure out, could this have been something random? But it didn't feel it. That's the key thing for me, is it wasn't only the unusual coincidence, but how that felt. It felt real. I was talking to my dog in my dream, and then my dog left, and I felt it, and I woke up in tears. Like, it's really hard for the Temple of Randomness people, the skeptics, to explain something like that away. I mean, I'm sure somebody will try, but I'm just not interested at this point, because I've done my explorations. I've spent 30 plus years going through all of the different arguments for and against this. And I don't know, maybe you can surprise me with something new. But I've had many other incidents since then. So that's one of the key starting points of my journey, is realizing that we don't know. Like, our current science can't explain how did my dog come to me in my dream and very powerfully say goodbye, and then actually in the physical world go goodbye, get killed. Science can't currently explain it. It's not that it never will, it's just that we haven't tried very hard, because we've been so invested in existing paradigms, existing boxes of logic that explain things away with stuff like randomness. We haven't tried very hard, but I have, because that was a profound event. So I'd be curious for you, like, just to wrap this one up, I'd be curious, have you had any events like that you can't explain, that you can't just explain away and say, oh yeah, that was just random? I remember I was at a scientific conference, and in hushed tones, once a colleague that I had met at this conference explained to me a situation where she had once been washing dishes in front of her window, and they lived near a field, and the field was apparently at the edge of some kind of gully or cliff type thing, and they had some kind of like little riding tractor they would go use to mow the field or whatever. So she's washing dishes, and she suddenly gets this feeling. She couldn't see anything happening out the window, but she suddenly gets this feeling of like, oh, I got to stop what I'm doing and go out and like do something different. And so she goes out, and she like looks around, and she's like, I have to go over by the edge. She goes over, and I guess there were some trees over there. She goes over, and she finds her daughter like on this riding thing. Her daughter was old enough, like I think 8 or 9, to like figure out how to drive this thing, and maybe had driven around with a parent on it before. Was driving this thing, but had gotten it in gear and couldn't get it out of gear, and was driving towards the edge of this thing. And she, fortunately it's not going super fast, but the kid is still kind of like, can't do anything and is headed towards the edge. And she runs over and she's able to stop this thing in time before it goes over the edge with her kid. Again, but she told me this in hushed tones. And then afterwards she's like, okay, don't share this. She didn't want her name shared. Hopefully, that was like 20 years ago that this person shared this with me. So I doubt that the person is going to be upset that I don't name names or context or anything else apart from the story. But I've heard from other people stories like this. So what are your stories like this? Have you had anything like that you just, it's wow, how did I know that? How did I know that person was going to do that or call or whatever? I'm curious to hear. But to wrap up this, please subscribe. That really helps me do more of this. The more I get people excited and interested in this, the more it encourages me to continue the journey with you. Because I think at the end of the day, this is going to really help us understand, gain a bigger picture context for what is going on. What the hell is going on in our world today? Why are things so crazy? Why do things seem so bleak? And how can you find some optimism in there? Because I think there is still reason for some optimism. So I'm looking forward to seeing you next time, and I'll talk to you later. I look forward to your comments.